There's something that's always bothered me about the Zoldyck family, which is very apparent when you look at their family tree. The oldest Zoldyck we're aware of is Zig Zoldyck, Isaac Netero's Dark Continental companion, and a man who, as far as we know, had no siblings. But look, fair enough, that dude may have lived hundreds of years ago. We can't expect to have a full detailed description of his immediate family. But Zig may or may not also have been Maha Zoldyck. It's a bit complicated and we won't get into it here, but this is our great-grandfather of Killua, a man who, to the best of our knowledge, has no siblings, who fathered Killua's great-grandfather, a man with no siblings, who fathered Killua's grandfather, Xeno Zoldyck, a man also with no siblings, who fathered Silver Zoldyck, another man with no siblings, who suddenly fathered 5 children, all of which male, and only one of which will be the next heir of the Zoldyck family. But what happens to the other siblings once this heir is selected? Or better yet, what happens to them before this heir is selected? Because we currently have 5 generations of Zoldycks, and the scary thing that 4 of these generations have in common is being led by a male heir with no siblings. So my thinking is that there could be one last dark twist to the Zoldyck family, being a succession contest style ritual to decide which sibling becomes the new patriarch of the Zoldyck family, with the process and/or criteria involving killing all of their siblings. A ritual that Maha, Xeno, Silver, and unnamed great-grandfather Zoldyck all completed, proving themselves to be the best assassins of their generation, and hence why none of them have any brothers or sisters to speak of. I should say that there could all just be a coincidence. Perhaps all of the Zoldyck aunts and uncles are just dead. Assassination, very dangerous profession after all. But also, deciding to have just one child seems like an exceptionally dangerous idea for a family so focused on maintaining a dynasty. Because all it takes is for, one unfortunate assassinating an accident and your entire family history is erased from the world. The Zoldycks are the kind of family who are hyper-focused on preservation and longevity, and as such, I also don't think they would be willing to have just one child and hand over the family business to whoever or whatever that child happened to become. Again, it's far too risky, and a much better idea to have as many children as possible and select the best candidate among them. In a way, it's sort of like rudimentary genetic modification. The Zoldyck family makes sure that only those with the absolute best of assassin qualities get to pass those qualities on to the next generation. Because with all due respect to Piggy, this is how we make sure that the Zoldyck family always end up in reasonable management, rather than following some sort of strict monarchistic code of seniority above everything. Which is why characters like Xeno, Silver, Kikyo, and Tsubone are always comparing the current batch of siblings. And all of their eyes are fixed on Killua as the obvious and favorite candidate. Not only is he the most talentsome, but he also possesses the aesthetic qualities of our 2 previous Zoldyck patriarchs, being white hair, and up until recently it was also thought that Killua inherited their Nen affinity of transmutation, but then Togashi threw a bit of a big twist into that idea by revealing in an exhibition that both Silver and Xeno are actually emitters, contrary to popular belief. But Killua is the only sibling with white hair, and that may be a very important genetic signifier for whoever goes on to be the Zoldyck heir. Because to be as fair as I can to a family of notorious assassins, they charge quite a premium. And to command that price, they need to make sure that they are providing a premium service. And not all of us have the luxury to afford such a service, but this is where the sponsor of today's video, Rocket Money, enters the financial battlefield to help you manage your money better. In the world of finance, you are a general and your dollars are your troops. And deploying those dollars strategically and with sound logistics is a skill that far too many people lack, including myself. And one of the many features I love about Rocket Money is their ability to identify and cancel subscriptions that I've forgotten about with just a few taps. And to date, Rocket Money has helped save customers over $500 million dues in cancelled subscriptions. That's 500 million more troops to fight for the financial gains that you're after, with none of the tedious admin work of going through bank statements and trying to figure out why it is that you're even being charged with practically zero information that you're given. And Rocket Money can also help you create a customized budget in seconds. It is incredibly simple and intuitive, and Rocket Money can also automate your savings. After you choose a goal, the app automatically analyzes your accounts to determine the optimal time to save so that you reach your goals faster. I've personally been using Rocket Money for just over half a year now, and I used part of my savings for this month to surprise my dog with a brand new ball that she eventually destroyed. But before that happened, many a good game was played. So to take control of your finances today, go to rocketmoney.com/NewWorldReview to get started for free. And on a personal note, thank you so much to Rocket Money because it's sponsors like them that allow us to bring you the best fictional hunter content possible as often as possible. So definitely check them out, but for now it's back to you, me. To get slightly dark for a second, I brought up the idea of sisters just before, and it should be said that every member of the Zoldyck family who didn't marry into it is male. Even Alaka, who is biologically male but presents herself as female. And I imagine that this gender ambiguity within the Zoldyck family is extremely helpful in the assassination profession, with both Alaka and Kalato being able to pass for whatever gender they so desire. Just seems like a very valuable skill to have. But I do think it's very possible that only male children are deemed acceptable as Zoldyck, because that gender is one of the qualities that they seek in an heir. But it's very hard to ensure that in the, the birthing process. So it would not surprise me if any female children that did spawn were either killed at birth or given away or just dumped somewhere, like Meteor City. And there is actually some evidence for this when we look at the ages of the Zoldyck siblings. According to the Hunter x Hunter timeline, Kalato is 12, Alaka is 13, and Killua is 14. So we had some pretty relentless baby making there by Silva and Kikyo. However, there is then a gap as Milky is 19 and a bigger gap with Illumi being 26. So 5 years between Milky and Killua and 7 years between Illumi and Milky. My thought here being that this was not an intentional age gap, and that during this time Silva and Kikyo may still have been producing more children, but they were all girls and thus deemed unworthy. To the best of our knowledge, the Zoldyck family has never had a matriarch, and the only female Zoldyck who we've ever clearly seen is Killua's mother Kikyo, who was found in Meteor City. However, there is one other. The only other woman we're aware of is the Zoldyck grandmother. This would be Zeno's wife, who was only mentioned in the manga, but the anime went as far as to give her a silhouette, so she is apparently alive. But I would bet that that grandma's circumstances are quite similar to Kikyo's, and that she married into the family in order to produce the next batch of heirs, which included a Silva. And it may even be a requirement to find a woman with opposite characteristics to the ideal Zoldyck heir in order to make selecting this heir easier. So for example, instead of finding someone with white hair like Silva and Zeno, we found a mother with black hair, so that we can filter out all of the black-haired children. And instead of finding someone with strong emotional disposition, we find a mother who can pretty much never keep her emotions at bay, which, yeah, it might sound ridiculous, but to that I say two things. Firstly, Kikyo's quote, hysteria, is so over the top that it even has its own song in the Hunter x Hunter Nightmare of Zoldyck musical, and secondly, this temperament has been directly referenced by Subone, who said that both Illumi and Milky take after their mother too much. They have too many of Kikyo's qualities, whilst Killua is seen as more of a young Silva. Kikyo is also very, very emotionally invested in Killua, and even cried tears of joy after being stabbed by Killua. She was just so happy to see that her baby boy had gained such skill. And in fact, the only other child that Kikyo has shown any affection towards whatsoever is her younger son Kalato, and even then it is nowhere near on the same level as Killua. Kikyo seems to have gone all in on Killua, and I feel like that would make sense if you only expected one of your children to survive. You would only want to emotionally invest in that one. Very much like the queens of the Kakin succession contest, several of them do have multiple children who are engaged in battle combat for the crown, but they tend to favor one of those children and reserve emotion only for that one. And while we're here, something particularly brutal about the Kakin succession contest is that, as far as we're aware, it starts a bit arbitrarily. There are probably more rules and procedures for it, but as far as we know, King Nasubi just declared it was happening one day, and it's inherently unfair to do so because the older a prince is on that random day, the more of an advantage they have in the contest. In fact, resources and powers are unevenly allocated based on the order of the prince's births and which queen they were born from. And so if you happen to be a child or even a baby at the time that the contest is called, then that's just tough luck, really. And these rules are so horrendously unbalanced because the goals of this contest are the exact opposite of the Zoldyck family goal. With the Kakin Empire, it's all about making as many sacrifices as possible to power the empire. The best candidate to rule the empire does not necessarily win, nor are they really engineered to find the best candidate to win. In fact, whoever becomes king is almost irrelevant because the core ritual is about obtaining the blood, so much blood, of all of the other siblings. whereas Zoldyck's succession focuses exclusively on the next heir. One person will be selected to lead this family into the next generation. And there is a shocking sense of fairness applied to this process and in fact every procedure to do with the Zoldyck family. Even though their parents clearly favor Killua, Silver and Kikyo treat all of their children minus Alaka for Nanaka reasons equally. And so I would imagine that whatever process gets undertaken to select the Zoldyck heir is also one of supreme fairness. And one very basic metric for that fairness would be to at the very least let all of the kids mature into adults first. So Silver Zoldyck is currently 48 years old, whilst Illumi, as we stated before, is 26. This means that Silver started production on his first child when he was around 21, and so Silver may have been one of the middle or even younger siblings of his generation. In terms of the current generation, the youngest Zoldyck is Kaluto. He's currently 12 years old and already an accepted member of the Phantom Troop. Very impressive. But if we're keeping all things as equal as possible, then we wouldn't even be talking about succession until Kaluto has reached the age of 18 or whenever it is that the family designates as maturity. It could be much older, could also be much younger. Although if we are looking strictly at the concept of equality, then age is not necessarily the best metric for that. And what we would want instead is to ensure that all of the candidates have roughly the same basic level of ability. And to that, I would point to the testing gates that grace the entrance to the Zoldyck family estate. When this structure was first introduced, it was stated that if you're not able to open it, then you are deemed unworthy to enter and will be eaten by a doggy. Which sounded fine at the time, but in retrospect, it's a bit questionable. Because anyone, and I mean anyone with general strength training, can open that first gate. You don't even need Nen. In the manga, Leorio was even able to open the second gate through brute force alone, which the anime cuts out, but it did include the line about him jerking off during the chairman election arc, so that's nice. To be fair to the anime though, who cares? Because yeah, it's cool and all that Leorio was able to open 2 gates, but does opening 2 gates make Leorio even more worthy than Gon or Kurapika at the time? No, not at all. You just need to open the first one and it has the exact same effect. And so my proposal is that the testing gates are designed for the Zoldyck siblings, specifically as a measurement of power and readiness. And when all of the siblings can open all 7 gates, that is when we trigger the search for the next heir of the Zoldyck family. Because at the very least then you would be able to ensure a more fair contest. And also ensure that the next head of the Zoldyck family meets that bare minimum standard of power required, to prevent a situation where an entire batch of siblings happen to be below par. And where we currently stand here is that Killua, prior to learning Nen, was able to open the first 3 gates, which is insane because that was all raw strength, and after learning Nen, Killua can now open 5 of the 7 gates. So he's getting quite close to maxing out. But mate, those 6th and 7th gates are on a whole different level of difficult to open. And we don't know where the rest of the siblings currently stand, but I would imagine that Illumi, Miliki, and Kaluto can at least open 3 gates. They're all Nen users, so surely they can do what Killua did prior to learning Nen. And just as a side note, in chapter 68 of Me and Roboko, in order to gain access to the editorial department of Weekly Shonen Jump, you had to open the testing gate from Hunter x Hunter. The idea was that a structure this extreme was needed in order to prevent leaks and spoilers from being dispersed into the outside world. Not that I think this physical metric is the only thing that would matter. In fact, it's probably just one of many criteria. And within the Zoldyck family, mentality has always been treated as far more important than physical ability. That's why there is so much concern over Killua, because he has the physical gift, but he's not in the right mental headspace. To contrast this against the Kakin Empire once more, the mentality of the victorious prince in that contest is irrelevant. It just becomes their divine right to take the kingdom in whatever direction they see fit, which is why we have so many different competing ideologies. But within the Zoldyck family, there is definitely a more homogenous approach. It is very, very important to the family that they all share the exact same principles, the exact same mentality, and have the exact same goals. So there would have to be a mental component to selecting an heir as well. But whatever that criteria is, the big question we'd have is, after this succession process is initiated, who would win? And I think that the answer to this is far more simple than the Kakin contest. As in the words of Miliki Zoldyck speaking about his brother Killua, he probably has one of the most awesome talents ever spawned by the Zoldicks, even Mummy says so. But let's face it, he's absolutely no good as an assassin. He's too erratic, he runs off, makes friends. What kind of person is that to head a family of renowned assassins? And Zeno comments that these are all valid points, but at the same time, these very valid points have never really bothered Zeno or Silver, potentially because they've both been in Killua's shoes, and while he still has a way to go, they might be able to see history repeating itself with Killua. And realistically, Killua's only serious competition would be Illumi, and Subona has stated that Killua will eventually leave Illumi in the dust. If it came down to it, and it might, this is probably a more open and shut case. Killua is just so far and above everyone else, except for Illumi, but not for long. But the big moral question that would take place here is what would happen to Alaka, because Killua would never ever harm her. And the answer to that is that it's honestly probably not a question we'll ever need to answer. I find it very unlikely that we'll ever actually see the conclusion of the Zoldyck family's arc in Hunter x Hunter, especially since Illumi and Kabuto may even die during our current succession contest, but this is just a lingering thing I've had floating around in my head, and now it's in your head, just like one of Illumi's needles.